All right, let's talk about one of the most powerful and honestly heartbreaking character stories in all of gaming, the story of Arthur Morgan. Now, this whole thing is set way back at the end of the 19th century, right when the era of outlaws is dying out and a more modern America is taking over. His journey, it's not just some plot in a game. It's a really deep look at a man who's dealing with the end of his world and, well, the end of his own life. You know how it is in any great story, right? The death of a character you've been following is a huge moment. Sometimes it just comes completely out of left field and it just shocks you, leaves you reeling. And then there are the other ones, the deaths that feel totally unfair, totally unjust. And they just fill you with this rage, you know? You want someone to pay for what happened. But then you have the death of Arthur Morgan. And it wasn't just a shock, it wasn't just infuriating, it was profound. It was an ending that hit people so hard that years later they are still talking about it, still feeling it. So, what was it? Why did this one land so differently? Well, it all boils down to the experience itself. This game is so incredibly immersive that you don't just feel like you're controlling Arthur, you feel like you are him. You're in his world, you're making his choices, hearing his thoughts, feeling the actual weight of his life. And that connection, that is absolutely the key to why this story has so much emotional power. So, to really get why his end is so impactful, we've got to go back to the beginning. Who was Arthur Morgan before it all changed? Let me tell you, he was no knight in shining armor, not even close. His entire life was built on violence and just surviving. He was the main enforcer for the Vanderlinde gang, a man who took what he wanted and, believe me, he was not afraid to get his hands dirty. He was a product of his time, you know. A time when the Wild West was fading and guys like him were basically becoming living dinosaurs. But here's the thing. Underneath that tough, grizzled exterior, there was this deep complexity. The guy had this fierce sense of loyalty, he was surprisingly thoughtful, and he always carried this kind of quiet sadness around with him. He wasn't evil just to be evil, he was just a man doing the only thing he knew how to do, all while wrestling with the morality of a life that was, piece by piece, falling apart. And then it happened. The one single moment that changed absolutely everything. The catalyst that kickstarts his entire transformation. The story slams Arthur, and us, with that exact question. I mean, for a guy who lived his entire life one job at a time, always thinking he could outrun his past, what do you do when you suddenly realize you can't outrun the clock? He gets tuberculosis, and just like that, his fate is sealed. It's not a bullet from a rival or a lawman that's going to get him, it's a disease. This diagnosis completely flips his entire perspective on its head. Suddenly, the future isn't some far-off idea. It's a deadline. So, staring his own mortality right in the face, Arthur starts this quiet, desperate race against time. And he's not trying to save his own life. He knows that's a lost cause. He's trying to salvage whatever's left of his soul. And you really see this shift in his actions. The choices he starts to make are different. He begins putting other people before himself, trying to fix some of his past wrongs, and making sure the people he cares about have a future, even if he knows he doesn't. You realize his redemption isn't about him getting forgiveness. It's about him creating some kind of meaning in the little time he has left. But here's the tragic part. As Arthur is fighting this huge internal battle for his own soul, there's this other force, an external one, that's threatening to tear down everything he's trying to build. And the biggest threat? It wasn't the law. It was coming from inside his own family. And right here, you see this story's main conflict just laid bare. You've got Arthur on one side and Micah Bell on the other. They represent two totally opposite paths. While Arthur is trying to grow beyond his violent nature, Micah just dives headfirst into the worst parts of it, the greed, the chaos, the pure self-interest. They're like perfect mirror images of what a man can choose to become in a dying world. Micah's betrayal isn't just some plot twist, it is a thematic gut punch. He represents the exact poison that Arthur is so desperately trying to purge from his life and from his gang. So in the end, Arthur isn't just fighting Micah, he's fighting a version of the man he used to be. So all of this, the sickness, the search for redemption, the betrayal from his own brother, it all builds to one of the most powerful and, surprisingly quiet, endings ever made. Arthur doesn't get to ride off into the sunset. There is no triumphant last man standing battle where he takes down all his enemies. The world just keeps on turning, mostly unchanged by his personal struggle. There's no miracle cure, no last-second escape. The life he lived and the sickness he caught, It meant his story was always heading towards this one inevitable conclusion. It's just brutally, heartbreakingly honest about his fate. He's weakened, he's beaten, but after making sure John Marston and his family get away safely, Arthur finds a quiet spot on a mountain, and he dies, not in a blaze of glory, but peacefully, watching his last sunrise. It is a moment of just profound, tragic beauty. So why? Why does this ending, this specific character, stick with us so much? Why does it hurt? Well, the answer is really in the nature of his fight. See, Arthur Morgan is a textbook example of a classic tragic hero. He's a flawed person, but he has these noble qualities, and his downfall feels both completely unavoidable and just heartbreaking. We feel for his suffering, but we also can't help but admire his final push to do something good. The real power of his story isn't that he was some perfect hero, because he absolutely wasn't. He was a deeply flawed man who made a ton of mistakes. But when he was faced with the end, he made a conscious choice to be better. It's the attempt at redemption, not whether he achieved a perfect life, that makes him so human and so relatable. And that, right there, is his ultimate legacy. In his final moments, Arthur's actions weren't for him. They were all to make sure that his friend, John Marston, could have the family and the life that Arthur never could. It's the most selfless act you can imagine, coming from a man who lived a pretty selfish life. It's a really complicated question, isn't it? And there's no easy answer. Was it a just end for a career outlaw? Or was it a tragic end for a man who found his humanity just a little too late? It's a real testament to this story that we're still asking that question. I'm curious, what do you think?